The Olympics amid controversy. Beset by boycotts, human rights abuse allegations, and COVID-19, the Beijing Winter Games are underway. But will geopolitics, rather than sports, take center stage? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the Beijing Winter Olympics. The 24th Winter Olympics mark the first time any city has hosted both the Summer and Winter Games. And while some venues from August 2008 will be a familiar sight, almost everything else feels different. This is the most contentious Olympic Games in decades, with the United States leading a diplomatic boycott over China's human rights record. There are no government representatives from Canada, Australia, Belgium, or the UK, among others. Beijing has, of course, condemned the boycott and warned athletes not to politicize the Games.
The so-called China human rights issue is a lie made up by people with ulterior motives. China's relevant government departments have already responded to this on multiple occasions. I want to emphasize that the Olympics is a great spectacle for athletes and sports fans across the world. From the current situation, many countries and athletes have expressed their support for the Beijing Winter Olympics.
So in lieu of Western dignitaries, Russian President Vladimir Putin stole the spotlight as he arrived just ahead of the opening ceremony for a summit with Xi Jinping. It marked a strong display of unity between the two regional powers. Beijing expressed support for Russia in its demands from NATO and the US over Ukraine, while Moscow said it fully opposed independence for Taiwan. Beijing also criticized what it called a negative US influence in Europe and the Asia Pacific. And Putin also slammed the Olympic diplomatic boycott. But there are several other EU countries not following the US lead. President Emmanuel Macron said France would not participate in the boycott, calling such a move insignificant.
I think that we should not politicize this subject, especially given what we know, in order to take very small and symbolic measures. We have to be clear. Either we say, we're going to do a complete boycott, we're not going to send any athletes, or we say, we're going to try to re-engage things and have a workable, useful action. As always in the international arena, I'm more in favor of doing things that have a useful effect.
And of course, COVID-19 is another major challenge for the Games. In spite of China's zero-case strategy, 55 new infections were found among Games-related personnel just ahead of the opening. The zero-tolerance policy nationwide has led to the cancellation of nearly all international flights and confined participants to a closed loop or bubbles in order to prevent contact with others. Ticket sales have been very limited as well, with the general public banned from attending events in person. The chair of the Olympics medical expert panel believes the measures will be successful.
So I think we are confident that the system will work. But we will not yet relax, obviously. The one thing we have learned about COVID for 2 years is it always can surprise us. So we keep all the measures in place, we stick with the playbook, and we make sure we remain safe.
So to talk more about the implications and complications of the Winter Olympics, I'm joined now from Beijing by Einar Tangen. He's a political and economic affairs commentator and a senior fellow with the Taipei Institute. From Manchester in the UK is John Bradley. He's a sports commentator, an advocate for player welfare, and a media consultant for sporting organizations. And completing our panel from Uppsala, Sweden, is Ashok Swain, a professor from the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let's first get a measurement, really, of how controversial these Olympics are, especially compared to, arguably the most controversial Moscow Olympics in 1980 during the Cold War, when the U.S. actually entirely boycotted the competition. There are some very different issues at play now, but Ashok, how badly have geopolitics actually overshadowed these games?
I think, as you mentioned, in 1980 and the 1984 till 1984, the politics was really addressing the game or affecting the Olympic Games quite a lot. And after that, we saw there is a change, at least there is a direct politics. We're not really getting into this Olympic game. Olympic game is always on some kind of politics, but it was not in that sense. But now, though, as we see, there is a Cold War of that era is actively back. And we see that the countries are trying to position themselves. Though there is issues of human rights, the other issues are coming, but it is not exactly something new, which China was not supposed to have. So I think this is something at this point shows that the China is positioning itself as a power, and that's why there has been a reaction from the West of to try to confront it or try to put its own base together, and the battle line is looking very, very clearly open.
Okay. Einar, same question for you, but please, before you get to it, you are in Beijing right now, and I want to ask you how it feels to be there. Is there the usual buzz around the Olympics that you had in 2008 or in other Olympic cities past?
It falls in the traditional spring festival. It's been actually pretty quiet. And because they have downplayed the ability to actually attend the events, it's not as festive as it was in 2008 when I was here. I actually hosted the Olympic Truce Awards, which is really about the spirit of being able to have competition even when you're at loggerheads. Remember, the Peloponnesian Wars in Greece were going on as they held these Olympics in these various years. So this is not something new. I was hoped that the spirit of the Olympics would overcome this. Obviously, that's not the situation. I would take a slightly different track. Beijing feels very strongly that it's the U.S. who is the aggressor here, that their constant bad-mouthing of China, allegations which they believe are incorrect about everything from Hong Kong to human rights abuses, and this constant daily parade of sanctions, economic and otherwise, against it. So they see this as a hegemonic power clinging to its role in the world when it is in fact changing.
But tell me, overall, have these issues really, cast a shadow over the Olympics this time?
No, not within China. There's tremendous amount of buzz. People are very, very excited about this. There's been an incredible outpouring. 300 million people have suddenly found an interest in ice sports, which is unusual, especially in a place where you only really get snow and ice in the northeast region of China. Where people actually play winter sports. Now, all of a sudden, it's very big, and there's a lot of sports groups who are out there trying to promote this and take advantage of it. It's unfortunate. It could have been an area where you could get a lot more fans, a lot more participation. This would have been good for everybody who has a ski slope or an ice skating rink.
Okay, that sounds at least upbeat. Let me turn to John Bradley. First, I want to ask you, regarding the political issues only, how are the athletes actually feeling about these games? Is it disappointing to have, globally, arguably, less focus on the sports?
I think it was significant when we saw yesterday Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker in the American House, urging their athletes not to actually speak out while they're out in Beijing for the Olympics, as to not upset the Chinese state and the officials there, or get themselves into trouble while they're there. I think what we've seen recently over the last few years is certainly more voice from athletes on political, social issues that they want to involve themselves with. I think they've got every right to do that as well. It's very difficult for them, of course, because they've worked all their lives, remember, a lot of these people, to get to the Olympics. And for some, it might be the only opportunity they ever have to compete at this level. So it's a double-sided coin for them, really. While there are issues that clearly are standing out for many, there's also the fact that this is the opportunity of a lifetime for them to take part and compete against their for the competitors from all around the world. And as we say, they might only ever get that one chance.
Right. It's a difficult position for some of them to be in. And John, you're also a media consultant. So tell me, how are sponsors feeling about these games, and how should they feel, do you think?
I think one of the first things that you have a responsibility to when you're putting games on like this is that there are a great amount of sponsorship money, which is one of the reasons that we see the Tokyo Olympics get completed last year, and then of course we've got the Winter Olympics this year, and also we've had it with Champions League finals, global sporting events, European Championships in football as well. So we are beholden to sponsorship around the world now. Now, I'm certain that if there was industry sponsors who didn't want to be involved, they would certainly withdraw their money. We've seen that a lot in sport over recent years. And I think anyone who has put money in is happy to have their name associated with it. Will face criticism from human rights groups, as is expected. But if they have a long-term relationship with the Olympic Committee, then they aren't going to give that up, because they always feel a responsibility to keep supporting the games and the athletes that are competing in it. It's a very difficult situation to deal with for them.
Yeah. Ashok, let me come back to you, because, there's always this argument that you shouldn't be politicizing sports. It is about the games, but you can also argue that, as many historians would say, it was because sports became so intertwined with the movement against apartheid and being, part of being international sanctions and sports, South Africa being banned from international sporting events, that the apartheid regime was taken down. So where do you stand on the Olympics itself? And should people be taking political stances when it comes to games that are so important for international brotherly competition like this?
I think, if you ask that, that's everybody says that the sports should be out of politics. But as we know, we all move in a scenario or a situation all the time that the politics controls these things. And the sports, actually, there are two ways you can use the sports for politics. Sports can never, nothing can stay out of politics, at least when the whole world or the global system has been so politicized. But I think you can use the sports for a politically beneficial way, or you can use the sports politically to make things worse for some things. But I think what happens, you mentioned apartheid or some other regimes which you think that you should be boycotting because those are the very principal moral issues, and there are no other options available. So you take those kind of measures. But I think here, as I see it, by boycotting the Beijing Olympic it doesn't make any sense to me, because it doesn't make really politically any type of real positive impact out of it. Because I thought, if I may, because it had given a possibility for United States to improve the relationship with Beijing or China, which had gone bad during the Trump time. And this would have been possible because both of these two countries need to work together. There are various issues the world is facing. You don't really need this kind of Cold War to become active again, because while the world is facing serious challenges. So they could have used this Olympics in a much better way rather than going into this kind of political upmanship.
Very interesting. So you're with the French president, at least on this one. Ashok, then Einar, let me turn to you, because, it hasn't gone unnoticed that the meeting between Presidents Xi and Putin got its share of the headlines. Has this boycott and the actions of the U.S. kind of pushed Russia and China closer together?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the Olympics. I think it's the reality of tensions in Taiwan and also in Ukraine right now that we're facing. If you go back, it's eerily similar to what happened in World War I, where you had a large hegemonic power, Great Britain, trying to keep Germany, quote, in its place. And this is really the danger. No one wants to go to war. Unfortunately, they end up sleepwalking into them. So the significance of Xi and Putin meeting, showing that they're much closer, that they want to talk about more trade, this has ominous overtones. If Europe rejects Russia, they're going to have an energy problem. But in addition to that, it'll just push Russia closer to China, because they'll have no choice but to put the infrastructure in to supply China with more of the natural energy that they have so much abundance of.
So would you go as far as to say, Einar, that this boycott, is in a way backfiring because it's given a sole focus now to Putin and Xi and their unity in these days?
Well, I think it's a lot of the actions have backfired, and that's exactly it. If the U.S. is concerned if we're concerned about China and Russia coming together, why are we doing our best to push them together? It just doesn't make sense. And in terms of your earlier point, I would just like to say that I don't think Beijing thinks it's an apartheid nation, one that has eliminated extreme poverty and done so much
Yeah, it
for
was
its
just for
people.
historical reference, yeah.
I think they would probably not like being equated that way.
No, it wasn't. I was just saying how boycotts had made a difference in that case. But as Ashok said, it's really not the same case today. But John, I want to come to you because there's something else very significant at play in these games, and that is the strict COVID precautions. You know, aside from that Belgian athlete that was taken to the wrong place to isolate again, everyone is locked into these bubbles. How does just that alone affect their psyche, as well as their physical health?
Yeah, I've worked quite closely with athletes who have been put inside bubbles over the last couple of years since COVID first struck us, and they talk very much about the mental aspect of the difficulties of only being involved with the same people day in, day out. You work in your training sessions, you come back in, you're eating with the same people, you see the same people every day, you're not seeing your families outside that. So they say that the mental aspect of it is the most difficult to deal with. In terms of physical performance, a lot of the work, 99% of the work, has already been done in the past couple of years to get them prepared for the games. So that's not going to affect them too much, but we have a responsibility worldwide now to look out for each other, and we've got to sort of bring these athletes together from all around the world, and we've got to look after them, and also we've got to look after the public as well, who are in and around Beijing, and they're not going to run into these athletes. And I think that's a really sad point, because when you hear athletes, competitors talk about going to the Olympics, it's about the experience, Olympic experience, going out, seeing the city, seeing the different cultures, and learning all about where you are. And of course, that can't happen. But this is all down to the times that we live in. For the athletes, as we mentioned a little earlier, for many, it could be the only opportunity to get to compete at this level, and they're just happy to have that opportunity. And you've seen that, and I think it's important now that we talk about diplomatic boycotts, but also we talk about the fact that the athletes are being allowed to make their own decisions and go. And listen, if one feels that they can't go because of issues in the host nation, then kudos to them. But I think 99.99% of people there are there willingly and looking forward to the competition.
Right. John, I mean, tell me though, how do these Olympics actually compare to the other pandemic-struck Olympics in Tokyo 2021?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because when these athletes have given the opportunity to go and compete at this level, all they want to do is experience it all, and then you're told you're going to be locked away, and you're not going to be able to experience anything. You're going to live in a bubble. The same happened in Tokyo. The same has happened in other sports as well. And you've just got to basically live in your own little, we call it a bubble, we call it a closed loop in Beijing. And it is very much just the case now of going there, getting it done, and trying to achieve what you've set your heart's life on doing. So it is what it is, I'm afraid, at this current moment in world history. And hopefully we'll look back in a few years and just look back on it as a short period in history, and we can all move forward. And I think China's worked very hard on that as well, and deserves a lot of credit for that. And you can hear from what is being said in Beijing that the main important thing is to look after the competitors out there.
Fair enough. Ashok, let me move on to you, and we're going to move this forward. What do you envision for the kind of fallout of these, and I'm going back to the geopolitics here, these political debacles that are kind of overshadowing the games? I mean, we had President Putin and President Xi Jinping come straight at it just before the opening ceremony to take very strong stances on issues that they hadn't before, that are very globally divisive. So where do you see things going actually after the games conclude? Because now what Presidents Putin and Xi have done, it's more or less set in stone.
No, that's the fear. That fear was anyone who understands a little bit of global politics had that fear that this will be happening, because there was a big hope that when the Biden administration came into power, it will play a smart politics. I mean, what is the smart politics would have been to keep both China and Russia separate, then possibly to get certain kind of strength yourself, because the withdrawal from Afghanistan last year has not been good for America's image or its military's own self-confidence. So I think you needed to first put your house in order. There are economic issues, there are political issues which US is suffering at home. That needed to be settled. But at the same time, to play the smart diplomacy to keep Russia and China separate. But what Biden administration is doing everything to bring them together. As we have discussed before, you created Taiwan problem. You again focused on Ukraine. You take the NATO to the doorstep of Russia, which Russia has been telling for a long period of time that it has a red line there. So these are the issues which you needed to learn from. At least, I mean, there are not many things we need to learn from Nixon, but at least they should have learned at that time in early 1970s what kind of policy they had. So I think this has really created. I mean, it's not that suddenly because of the Olympics that Xi and Putin have come together. Since 2013, Xi and Putin have met at least 40 times. And this is, of course, meeting which is taking place physically. I've written several pieces that this is the alliance which is being building, getting stronger. And this is the real, I mean, of course, China has been putting a lot of opposition to the US dominance. But I think Russia, China together is really fastening or speeding that process of US losing its influence.
Right. Einar, long-term implications now?
Well, I'd agree with my colleague, Ashok. I mean, he expressed it correctly. Biden does not appear to have any kind of coherent strategy, either domestically or internationally. And it's a bit of a shame. I mean, he's a nice guy. He's definitely not Trump. But for some reason, he doesn't have the ability to think of things outside the room. He's very good inside. He can sit down with people and figure out most of the time what can be done. But he seems to have a tin ear when it comes to the repercussions to those who are not in that room.
Okay. John, I'll tell you what, I'm going to finish with you. And let's bring it back to the Olympics itself. I don't mean to sound cynical here, but I want you to talk about the broader picture of the Olympic Games and the organizing committee and what we've seen in now recent memory with the Olympics. There have been a lot of scandals, not geopolitical scandals, but, you know, match fixing going back, quite a bit. The cost that it has caused, you know, cities, the Rio Games, for example. I mean, so many people had said, you know, you're almost bankrupting a poor country with the cost of these games. Do you expect the Olympics to get better, or because of things like, you know, security and just the cost of the infrastructure and the management, has it become unsustainable?
I think one of the biggest concerns we've seen in recent years was, you know, the levels of reported corruption that we saw in the Olympic Games, and clearly that had to stop very, very quickly. Had to clean up shop. It's happened in other sports as well. We've seen it in global football as well, and I'm afraid wherever there are huge amounts of money involved, that is always going to be a threat, no matter where you go around the world, and it can also involve where you hold the games as well. It's a shame because it's the culmination, as we say, of a life's work for these athletes to go there. But anywhere where there is such a great amount of finance, you know, you're always going to run that risk. And I think the good thing that we've seen now is the work against drugs within the sports as well. And while that might still continue, so I think it's much more minor now than it was many years ago. But listen, they've got a responsibility. This is one of the greatest global spectacles that we have. And the people who organise it, the committees that organise it, have a responsibility to the people, and also to leave a legacy. You know, we heard a little earlier, you know, Chinese people didn't have a clue really about winter sports until this year, and if that legacy can be held, you know, we end up with awful stories of the stadiums, even in London, where they almost had to give the London Olympic Stadium away to a football club because it was just so cost expensive.
Exactly.
And you hope it works for the people. That's the most important thing now.
I mean,
You know,
they do have to focus on
legacy
trying to
moving
make
forward.
these games more economically sustainable. Doesn't that need to be a lot more of an effort going into this, or else it just can't last?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you have big business desperate to involve themselves with the Olympic movement, with global sporting events, whatever they may be. They want their names associated with it. So I don't think you're ever going to have a shortage of people putting money into the Olympic movement or these, you know, the football tournaments or
Okay.
anything that you have. But it's important that then that is passed down for the future and it leaves that legacy moving
Yeah.
forward for the people of where the host cities are.
John, we're going to have to end it there. So unfortunately, we're completely out of time. For this edition of the Newsmakers, really, I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, as always, and our viewers for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter @the_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.